Everybody thought this story was slowing down until Candace Owens showed up with what she calls receipts. And suddenly, Erika Kirk wasn't saying justice. She was saying one word on repeat: stop. But here's the problem. When someone tells the internet to stop asking questions, the internet does the exact opposite. So buckle up, because this breakdown isn't about vibes, loyalty, or feelings. It's about contradictions, timing, and why this fight just blew wide open. At the center of this entire blow-up is a detail that people didn't notice at first, until they couldn't unsee it. When Charlie Kirk was killed, Erika Kirk publicly extended forgiveness to the accused shooter with a speed and calm that stunned even longtime supporters. No prolonged rage, no sustained public fury, no media crusade demanding blood. Instead, the tone was faith, grace, and moving forward. And for a moment, everyone respected that. But then Candace Owens entered the picture, not as a suspect, not as an enemy, but as someone asking uncomfortable questions. And suddenly, the emotional temperature spiked like a microwave on max. The calm disappeared. The grace evaporated. The interviews turned sharp, and people watching at home started doing that thing where they tilt their head like, wait, why does this feel different? Because grief usually points outward toward loss. But this anger felt targeted, specific, and urgent, like someone was trying to put out a fire before it spread. What made it unsettling wasn't just the contrast, it was the direction of the outrage. Candace Owens didn't pull the trigger. Candace Owens didn't plan the event. Candace Owens didn't run security. Yet, according to viewers, she became public enemy #1 overnight. The language shifted from sorrow to scolding, from mourning to command mode. Stop. Not let's talk, not let's clarify, just stop. And that single word landed like a record scratch. Because telling the internet to stop asking questions is like telling a cat not to knock a glass off the table. It's already halfway over the edge. Suddenly, people weren't debating theories anymore. They were debating why certain questions felt forbidden. And once the public starts wondering why curiosity itself is being treated like a crime, the story stops being about grief and starts being about control. And once that emotional contrast surfaced, people didn't just listen, they started rewinding. This is the fact where the money conversation quietly tiptoes into the room and then trips over the coffee table. As Candace Owens kept talking, viewers started noticing a strange imbalance in who was being accused of profiting and who wasn't. Small creators accused of cashing in, commentators accused of clout chasing, Candace Owens publicly scolded for monetizing content. Meanwhile, people online began pulling receipts, calculators, and suspiciously detailed spreadsheets out of thin air, pointing out that Turning Point USA fundraising surged dramatically after Charlie Kirk's death. Galas, donor events, emergency appeals, book promotions, all framed as honoring a legacy, of course. But the numbers were loud, very loud. And that's when the internet did what it does best. Pause the video, rewind 10 seconds, and say, wait, are we really mad at YouTubers making hundreds while an organization pulls in millions? Suddenly, the moral outrage started feeling selective, like airport security that only checks certain bags. What made this moment explode wasn't just the alleged dollar amounts, it was the tone. According to critics, Erika Kirk appeared far more furious about commentary than about financial windfalls happening in Charlie Kirk's name. And that contrast landed weird, really weird, because if money made from tragedy is the issue, people expect the smoke to rise evenly. Instead, viewers saw Candace Owens being framed as reckless and exploitative, while institutional fundraising barely got mentioned, almost like one was unspeakable and the other was sacred. That's when the narrative shifted from "this is disrespectful" to "why are we only allowed to ask certain questions?" And once the audience smells double standards, the story mutates. It's no longer about who's right or wrong, it becomes about who gets immunity, because in the court of public opinion, nothing raises suspicion faster than watching someone shout, "Stop asking questions," while standing next to a donation link glowing brighter than a Vegas billboard. And once money enters the conversation, silence becomes suspicious. Fact 3 is where the story stops being about what was said and starts being about who everyone suddenly didn't want anyone listening to. Because right around the time Candace Owens began asking sharper, more specific questions, something curious happened in real time. The tone of the response shifted from disagreement to shutdown. Not rebuttal, not correction, just a firm, almost panicked chorus of stop. No counter receipts, no step-by-step breakdown, just a verbal fire alarm pulled in the middle of the building. Viewers noticed it immediately. The more Candace talked, the faster interviews popped up, telling her to be quiet. The more she outlined timelines, contradictions, and inconsistencies, the louder the message became. This conversation is dangerous. And when people are told not to look somewhere, that's usually the exact moment they grab binoculars. What really made this moment stick wasn't even Candace Owens herself. It was the absence of engagement from the people being questioned. Critics expected a detailed response. Instead, they got emotional appeals, moral framing, and repeated warnings about harmful speculation, which ironically only fueled more speculation. Because if everything is false, you don't need a megaphone, you need a spreadsheet. And instead of spreadsheets, the public got vibes. Strong vibes? Defensive vibes? Please stop asking vibes. That's when online commentators began joking that the whole situation felt like a group project where one person keeps yelling "trust me" while hiding the Google Doc. And once that comparison sticks, it's game over. Because nothing keeps an audience hooked like the sense that the truth is sitting right there, and someone keeps slamming the laptop shut every time a cursor gets close. And when timing looks strategic, people start examining the players. Fact 4 is where people stopped arguing about individual moments and started zooming out to notice the pattern. Not a single clip, not one interview. The pattern. Viewers began lining things up like they were connecting red yarn on a corkboard. The timing of interviews, the consistency of talking points, the repetition of emotional language, and the very selective outrage about who was allowed to ask questions and who wasn't. And that's when the internet's favorite phrase showed up: "This feels managed." Because when every response sounds like it came from the same teleprompter, people stop listening to the words and start studying the choreography. Who speaks first? Who stays silent? Who suddenly becomes the villain of the week? It felt less like chaos and more like crisis communications on espresso, the kind where everyone knows their line, their cue, and exactly which topic must never ever be touched without gloves. What added tension, and yes, some dark humor, was how aggressively normal everything was supposed to appear. Smiles stayed polished, statements stayed rehearsed. The message was always calm, moral, and carefully wrapped in concern, while the audience could feel the anxiety leaking through the cracks. Commentators joked that it was like watching a house insist it wasn't on fire while actively boarding up windows and yelling at neighbors for smelling smoke. And once that comparison lands, it doesn't leave, because patterns don't accuse people, they invite questions. And fact 4 is the moment viewers realize this wasn't about one disagreement or one outspoken commentator. It was about control of the narrative, who gets to define reality, and why certain questions trigger a full alarm response while others are gently ignored. That's when curiosity turned into obsession, because history has taught the internet one thing very well: when a story is being carefully managed, there's usually something underneath it that refuses to stay buried. And once narratives shift, contradictions don't stay hidden. Fact 5 is where the story stopped being about what was said and became about what suddenly couldn't be said at all. Viewers noticed a strange shift. Topics that had been openly discussed weeks earlier were now radioactive. Questions that once floated freely were treated like emotional landmines. Entire lines of inquiry didn't get debunked. They got scolded, and nothing raises suspicion faster than being told, "Don't ask that," without ever being told why. The internet, being the internet, responded exactly as expected by asking it louder, slower, and with screenshots. People joked that the conversation had entered the museum phase, where you're allowed to look at the exhibit, but absolutely not touch, question, or read the plaque too closely. The tone shifted from persuasion to parental authority, less "here's the explanation" and more "because I said so." And historically, that never plays well online. What really fueled the suspense was how uneven the reactions became. Some critics were brushed off as unserious, others were framed as dangerous, and that inconsistency is what made Fact 5 stick. Because when reactions don't match the size of the question, people assume the question hit something sensitive. Comment sections turned into amateur psychology labs, breaking down facial expressions, phrasing choices, and timing like they were analyzing a true crime interrogation. Humor followed, of course. Memes about forbidden questions, jokes about topics needing a permission slip, sarcastic comments like, "Ah yes, the question that must not be named." But underneath the jokes was a real shift in public perception. Curiosity hardened into doubt, doubt into scrutiny. Fact 5 marks the moment the audience stopped waiting for answers and started watching behavior instead. Because when explanations disappear, patterns take their place. And once people feel like a story is being protected rather than explained, the suspense doesn't fade, it multiplies. And when facts stop lining up, trust evaporates fast. Fact 6 is where the spotlight stops hovering and locks in. This is the moment when people realize the controversy wasn't growing accidentally. It was being fed. New clips surfaced. Old statements were recirculated. Screenshots started appearing with timestamps so precise they felt less like commentary and more like courtroom exhibits. And suddenly, the energy shifted from emotional reaction to calculated presentation. Viewers joked that it felt like watching someone clean out a digital filing cabinet in real time, pulling documents with the calm confidence of someone who knew exactly where everything was stored. The humor came naturally. Memes about receipt season, jokes about printers overheating, comments like "this isn't a rant, this is a Dropbox folder." But beneath the laughs was a very real sense that the conversation had crossed a line. From grief and frustration into strategic exposure. Whether people agreed or not, they could feel it. This wasn't improvisation anymore. What made Fact 6 suspenseful wasn't just what was shown, it was how controlled it all felt. The pacing, the pauses, the way each new point seemed to anticipate the next criticism before it even landed. To audiences, it looked less like someone reacting emotionally and more like someone saying, "I've been waiting for this moment." And that's when speculation really took off. Commenters weren't just asking what the material meant, but why now? Why release this piece here and that one there? Why escalate when silence might have cooled things down? The jokes sharpened. This feels like a season finale. Netflix would call this episode 6 the turn. This isn't drama, it's a rollout. Fact 6 is the chapter where people stopped debating personalities and started analyzing strategy. Because once information is delivered with confidence instead of chaos, audiences assume intent. And whether that intent was clarity, pressure, or control, one thing became undeniable. The story was no longer drifting, it was being driven. Because once you tell millions of people to pause, they start pressing play. Fact 7 is where the room gets quiet. Not because nothing is happening, but because everyone is suddenly watching instead of talking. This is the moment when outside voices stop rushing in to pick sides and start leaning back like, okay, let's see where this actually goes. The comment sections didn't explode, they froze. Jokes slowed down, hot takes got longer. People who were once loud went oddly careful, choosing words like they were tiptoeing across a glass floor. And that alone told a story. Because when chaos turns into caution, it usually means something landed harder than expected. Even the humor shifted. Less meme energy, more dry sarcasm, less "this is wild," more "this is interesting." Viewers joked that it felt like everyone collectively realized this wasn't a group chat argument anymore. It was a public chessboard, and every move was now being screenshotted. What made Fact 7 suspenseful was the absence of immediate pushback. No rapid-fire rebuttals, no instant denials, no emotional counterpunch, just space. And in internet terms, silence is never empty, it's loud. Audiences began narrating the quiet like sports commentators. Notice how nobody touched that point. Look how fast the tone changed. That pause says more than a statement ever could. The humor crept in dark and dry. This is the part in the movie where the music stops. Everybody just checked with legal. Someone just said, "Let's circle back," unironically. Fact 7 isn't about what was said next, it's about what wasn't, and that's why it lingered. Because when a story stops being noisy and starts being careful, people don't look away, they lean in, and that divide is no longer just personal, it's ideological. Fact 8 is where the story stops feeling like commentary and starts feeling like brand management under studio lighting. This is the phase where everything suddenly looks polished. Statements sound smoother, appearances feel curated, the rough edges vanish overnight like someone hit apply filter on reality. Viewers noticed it instantly. The tone wasn't defensive anymore, it was professional, calm, almost rehearsed. People joked that the vibe shifted from raw emotion to approved talking points, from unscripted moment to "this has been reviewed by at least 3 people and a legal intern named Josh." Even the body language changed. Less heat, more composure, less reacting, more presenting. And that's when the audience started chuckling nervously because nothing makes the internet more suspicious than sudden serenity. As one comment put it, this feels like when the crisis PR team finally arrives with matching folders. What makes Fact 8 suspenseful is how confidence replaced chaos without explanation. No bridge, no transition, just a clean tonal jump, like skipping chapters in a thriller and landing straight in the courtroom scene. The humor turned sharp. Ah yes, the everything is fine era. This feels like a PowerPoint waiting to happen. Why does this suddenly sound like a press release read by a human? And yet, nobody stopped watching. Because Polish doesn't kill curiosity, it amplifies it. When things get smoother, people assume friction happened off camera. The audience didn't panic, they speculated with popcorn energy. Fact 8 isn't about what was said, it's about how controlled it suddenly felt, and how that control itself became the loudest character in the room. When a story trades emotion for optics, viewers don't disengage. They start asking one question on loop, half joking, half serious. Okay, who coached this? So here's the real question. When the facts feel incomplete and the answers keep shifting, who actually decides when the search for truth is supposed to end? Drop your take in the comments. Hit like if you believe asking questions isn't disrespectful, but enforced silence is. And subscribe if you want breakdowns that follow the timeline instead of the talking points. Because history shows that the moment everyone tells you to move on is usually the exact moment the real story is just getting started.